Team Ninja are perfectly named for the games they make, starting off with a couple of massive hits in the Dead or Alive series that involve pretty people kicking each other in the head. They then moved on to a reboot or update of the Ninja Tail game on the Xbox, which ramped up their claret across many entries since. Now, other games have come, but they are largely known for these and have worked closely with Sega's AM2 team on the current soft engine, which was behind the 2018 Dead or Alive 6. Now, it is not known if that sits at the heart of their latest series of Nioh games, but it is the most likely candidate, with similar cloth physics and character animations in cinematics, and a mixture of that improved level of PBR based materials, but it does look a lot better in Nioh 2, which is obviously the most modern of the two games I'll cover here. Now, both games follow the well-trodden Demon Souls style with a more Diablo twist, intertwined level design, fast-track one-way door systems, and infuriating attack, stun and stagger bosses. These games are the only ones where you fear pretty much anything that moves, even the trees. Death is always a moment away. Being a Koei Tecmo title, it is as quirky, unique and refreshing as many Japanese titles. From crazy spiritual monkeys staring over shoulders to crappy stag doos, vampire ladies and even cat clocks tucked into a ninja's pocket.
Dawn is breaking.
Although the original is based on the true story of the first non-Japanese samurai that travelled to Japan, the English William Adams, the first in 1600, older viewers may remember this tale from the Richard Chamberlain TV series Shogun. Although Francis Drake is nowhere to be found here, but our Irish hero takes the helm. In the sequel you get to choose your own hero instead, but the plot is equally as mad and disjointed, but adds value to the ongoing journey of the supernatural feudal Japan, even if it doesn't really add much to the combat contained therein. Now, as a big fan of these games, the reward and practice method they use, they do not kill you with hand-holding tutorials, and they let you learn and find your way in the game. I love them, and this is how they should be most of the time in my opinion. Pick it up, battle, swear, quit, return. The rewarding skill and timing based game this has is one of the best. So much variety and that key pulse and balance of armour, defence and evasion. All of those and the general tactics involved gel exceptionally well, and the rewarding moments of gratification you get from killing a big boss after so many attempts and failing really reminds me of games of old that are simple by design but complex by choice. All topped off with that strategic use of that yokai supernatural transformation right as you need it. But is this next generation version worth tucking into? Now, I think it's fair to say that like most remasters, they are not really intended for owners of the originals, specifically when in Nioh 2 it is less than 12 months out from the original release. Now, this is not to say it does not offer some improvements, which it does, simply expect more refinement rather than refurbishment. First up though is those pixel counts, and far more importantly the quality of them there pixels. First up is the PS4 that tops out at 1080p, so long as 30 FPS is your poison in that movie mode. If not, then the game can drop and consistently run at 1280 by 720. Now, all versions, including the newer ones, run their cutscenes at 30 FPS. They are real time, but they do not improve at all between the PS4 and the highest quality on the PS5. As you can see here, everything is identical. Subtle improvements such as particle effects and depth of field quality and resolution obviously apparent, but in terms of the texture details and materials, the very high glossy specular highlights of skin, all of that is very much last generation and doesn't improve here in the remasters or even the PC. Subtle improvements to bitmap resolution and sharpness aside, it is identical.
Ah, it's you. The man with the guardian spirit.
It's time for your execution.
But that action mode on the PS4 is pretty much 720p. The reward is that frame rate target can now leap up to 60 FPS. With a halving of that all important frame time, you get a reduction in quality of visuals and image quality. If we pick the movie mode's variable rate, we see the same quality of that mode, but the frame cap of 33 milliseconds is now extended, but dynamic resolution is now engaged. This means that 1080p is a target, but we often run somewhere around 1536 by 864, approximately for long periods of time. The benefit is we now get frame rates that average somewhere into the 40s, and this is true at least of Nioh. With this sacrifice we see a compromise too far for me though. Frame times are better but more inconsistent, which translates to stutter and input lag. Now across both titles there's not much in it between the PS4, so Nioh 1 and Nioh 2 in that movie mode you're getting pretty decent 130 milliseconds give or take, and 117 is an input median. So that's a combination of camera movement and input times. Remember, if you jump around or slash or dash back, there is a variation there quite significantly between a camera movement and button press. But you can see that going to the action mode we're seeing somewhere around that 82 milliseconds as a high point and 79 much closer together, and that's perfect. It feels consistent, it feels smooth, and therefore you get your timing and rhythm, your muscle memory in the right place. With that movie mode you're somewhere in between, and worse still, up at the top or down at the bottom, and that just feels inconsistent, causing you to miss things that you thought you got bang on. This improves the game, one that is dependent on split-second reaction times, feel and react so much faster from attack to dodge, so long as you have the key to do so, to even camera movement. I cannot state enough that for me, the action mode is the only choice. There's a little more cutbacks on top of this. CPU draws are reduced due to the fact there's less triangles, and alpha transparencies can be reduced, shadow map resolution and animation on incremental objects such as trees, leaves or certain flags and buildings. All are a compromise that can be noticed, but it is certainly worth that trade up in controls and enjoyment over the visual flourishes they may add. The Pro follows suit with very minor improvements. Resolution, shadow maps are slightly higher and therefore texture filtering is higher because of the resolution. It comes in at 3840 by 2160. Dynamic scaling in the movie mode, and that can go down to 1536 by 864. And then again in the action mode it's a full straight 1080p right down to 1536 by 864. Again, it might even go lower, I didn't count it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did. But generally it stays consistently around that 1440p in the movie mode and around 1080p in the action mode. And more importantly, that action mode is pretty much a locked 60 FPS here at 1080p. The variable mode is better, but it's still not good enough, and I would still choose the action mode here. The Pro is the best of the two. Shock horror. But not by a great deal, but certainly noticeable. So moving over to the PS5, you get 4K mode and graphics mode and 120 FPS mode as a third additional one. That 120 FPS mode is action, the graphical mode is better than the movie mode, and the 4K mode is basically movie mode. That's what it actually breaks down to, but they all run at least at 60 FPS here, aside the 120 FPS mode, which runs obviously at 120 FPS. So what does that mean in terms of visuals? Well, it means you get slightly better tessellation, it means you get slightly better texture filtering because of the higher resolution, and you get more draw distance off into the background, slightly less pop-in, objects drawing a little bit further away from you, and obviously you can see here as a comparison side by side, look at the boats, you can see that that isn't cooled quite as heavily on the PS5, with more boats, more objects being drawn on the jetty and the sea itself. And then in addition to this, you can also see that on the PS5, that culling of animation frames, that skinning, that animation rigging from the CPU and GPU cuts down to 20, 15 frames per second here on the PS4 Pro. And the PS4, it doesn't do that. It runs at a full flat 60 FPS and even runs close to that 120 on distant points, much further out on the 120 FPS mode. So generally it's utilizing the hardware well, and obviously it runs all of this at a much higher resolution more consistently. So in that 4K mode it's generally at 3840 by 2160. It does scale down to 1440p as a low point, but many counts come out around 1890p. And then in that graphics mode, again it's the same scaling, 1440 up to 2160, but it can come out somewhere around 1440p. It's very worst point, but averages somewhere around 1620 and 1800p. And then in the 120 FPS mode, it can scale between 1920 by 1080 up to a high point that I counted of 2880 by 1620, and then somewhere around 1296p 1440p is where it tends to sit more consistently. Having simply a 4K output is irrelevant when your assets, materials and geometry itself don't stand up to the level of scrutiny the resolution requires. That means it would have made more sense to improve the quality of the assets, the PBR based material shading and overall the geometry count over and above the pixel count, which is why at 1080p 60 FPS it's certainly the better option. Again, the game does look dated in terms of its PBR-based materials. I'd argue that it's not at all, really. It has an element of specular shading, but there's no gradation to that. There's no linear specularity across the model. It kind of just is either on or off. There's no roughness level that really stands out quite easily. There's no subsurface scattering. And again, the geometry edges of characters and models can be very, very low. It does use adaptive tessellation at points, significantly better on the PS5. And like I say, 4K or not, it doesn't really matter. I've always said this. The assets, the materials, the detail, it's not really a game that benefits from a huge amount of resolution, other than the fact that it uses very light or even no anti-aliasing at all. It's very, very light, so you get a lot of shimmer. So the higher the resolution, the more stable the image is, but it really doesn't make that much of a difference. Therefore, the 120 FPS mode does come into its own because the performance is very, very good. It's very solid. It does a few dips and stutters every now and then. Some of those are GPU issues, some of those are just general rendering issues when you can get objects that cause stutter in the engine. When you walk around certain sections of the map, you can see where it's obviously instantiating stuff into memory and it causes those stutters, but generally it's pretty close to 120 FPS in that mode. And those cutbacks on the animation, the shadow maps and all those, they're not really standing out unless you're having time to admire the scenery, because you're too busy trying to stop yourself from getting killed. So it's the most consistent version that I would choose, certainly in Nioh, because it looks almost the same and it performs so much better in that input times as well. And that's really where the PS5 version pays off. It allows you to move outside of that realms that we're used to on consoles of 60 FPS. And at that level, it's very similar to the PS4 Pro or the PS4. It's around 72 milliseconds at its median, and it's about 82 on its high. So it's slightly better, but not a huge amount in it. You certainly wouldn't notice that. But you do notice the fact that it's 40% better on the 120 FPS mode, dropping down to a low of 42 milliseconds, which is right back to the old school, console speeds of CRTs and Mega Drives and Super Nintendo. And that's really where that 120 FPS mode pays off. And a title like this that requires those kind of fast input times, it really means that there's no other choice but to take the action mode on the PS4 at 720p, or take that 120 FPS mode on the PS5 at that almost perfect 1440p. So there's really not a lot in it, and because, again, down to the quality of the assets and materials, it's not a title that really has that need to run at 4K resolutions. Like I say, it's a shame that they couldn't improve the assets and materials. That's far more work than just increasing the resolution, which is why resolution and frame rates are always the easy wins to do backwards compatibility boosts and to do quick remasters. That's always the way it goes. I've said this for years and years and years. Nothing new under the sun. The summary is that Nioh is a great game, and it always was, it still is. The PS5 version doesn't really add a great deal over that version. If you already had it, you are not missing out anything here on the PS5. Unless, of course, you want that additional input time and you have a 120Hz capable screen. If you haven't played it yet, then pick it up on everything you can, and if you have got a PS5, then it's the best place to play it. And that brings this first look of video to a close, which is Nioh from top to bottom across all console formats and the new remastered version. I hope you enjoyed it and found it informative and in-depth. Obviously, Nioh 2 is the other one that's also up at the exact same time, so go and check that video out, which covers it on the PC, the PS5, and those are last-gen consoles. It's a little shorter, but I've only split this up because I thought it would just be too long to have as one single video. Anyway, if you like what I do, please like, share, and support me by sharing this video where appropriate, subscribing to the channel, and ticking that bell, as I found out that no one gets notifications all the time, so please tick the bell and settle in for a great 2021, as I really hope I can get to the level that I wanted to when I started this channel way back in 2013. I'll catch you on the next one.